Hello, welcome. If you're looking for yoga in the home office, that's down the hall and to the left. We'll be talking about Watchguard Wi-Fi security here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dustin Benner. I work as a security specialist at ClearMedia, and we decided some time ago to do a webinar on Wi-Fi security because it's an aspect of cybersecurity that's often overlooked, to be honest, certainly by smaller companies. But it's also an attack vector that, in my experience, is largely ignored or not taken seriously. Most SMBs are lucky to monitor Wi-Fi for access point uptime and maybe some network performance monitoring. But most often it's a set and forget story once it's up and running. If that sounds familiar, you're certainly not alone out there, but we wanted to, at the very least, show you an alternative. Can we stop every attack and foil every hacker? No, probably not, but we can stop most of them. And we can also ensure we're not willfully negligent, and we should pay some attention to this aspect of network security. So I'm going to be taking you through the Watchguard Cloud Wi-Fi portal today, and there we'll take a closer look at one possible configuration of Watchguard's patented wireless intrusion prevention service, or WIPS. But first we'll look at the 6 main wireless threats. Not all of them malicious, but dangerous nonetheless, or potentially in any case. And then we'll see how WIPS responds. We'll look to the dashboard for alerts and other indicators that something is not as it should be, and we'll look at how we can respond, and we'll see the simple effectiveness of Watchguard WIPS. So let's take a look at the Wi-Fi threats as described by Watchguard. So the first one we've got here is the Ad-Hoc Network. So if I'm connected to company Wi-Fi or connected to an internal network using a network port somewhere that I found in the office, and I decide to turn on my mobile hotspot, then that would be considered an ad hoc network. Another example, the one given here actually, is an ad hoc network set up between two clients for file sharing, which would circumvent security as well. Obviously, that's what we're trying to avoid. The next one we have here is the misconfigured access point. Now this threat is likely created due to human error. So we have, everyone makes mistakes. We've deployed a new access point or a new SSID, and we end up with an SSID with inferior encryption protocol, or worse, an open SSID. So even though it may not be malicious, we still want to be alerted that we have an AP that doesn't match our authorized wireless profile, which I'll show you how to configure here a little bit later in the dashboard. So even though it wasn't malicious, it's definitely something we still want to be alerted to, because employees will probably not alert us to that. Then the first time that they connect, they may realize, oh, I didn't have to enter any pre-shared key or anything. But after that, they're not even going to be prompted for that information, so they're certainly not going to think about that. So it's certainly something we need to have some sort of automatic alert for. The next one we're going to look at is the neighboring access point. So you probably maybe are guilty of this yourself actually, but why might an employee connect to an external access point? Well, for a multitude of reasons, but generally the goal is to bypass company policy that is enforced on the network. So maybe someone wants to download some illegal material using torrents or some other peer-to-peer network, or access social media, which was blocked for productivity reasons. That's one that we see quite often. And on top of that, we don't manage the neighboring access point, so we don't really know what data is going over that network. Maybe there's some man in the middle going on. We don't know. We just don't have any visibility in that network, and that's what we don't want. We would, at the very least, even if they were to use the mobile network, that would be preferable to using a neighboring access point. So that's certainly something that we also want to be made aware of. Next, we've got the rogue access point. Now, we're getting into things where someone is likely doing something malicious. Not certainly, but potential is certainly there. This involves someone introducing his or her own access point into the network, so actually plugged into the wired network. That obviously would introduce some serious risk to your network, and as a rule, we don't want people, malicious or not, plugging things like that into our network. So it could be at the office, someone innocently has an access point that they bring because, I don't know, maybe they're an enthusiast and they think, oh, I want to just toy around with this at work, not realizing what the impact could be. But it could also be something malicious where someone, as you see here, someone sneaks into the whatever room where the network, the firewall, the switches are plugged in, and introduces their own access point there. It could be. So that's obviously something we want to try to avoid. Now, the next one is the rogue client. So we could then, in theory, have a client that would inadvertently connect to a rogue access point or an evil twin, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and hence become a rogue client. Now, we don't know what may have happened to that client in the meantime, so we don't want that client connecting to our trusted networks and spreading mayhem until we've had the opportunity to check out the device and remove the rogue access point. So what I alluded to just a moment ago was the evil twin, and this is one that people think about most often, I guess, when they think about Wi-Fi security. This entails the spoofing of a legitimate SSID and MAC address with the intention of fooling users into connecting to the evil twin SSID and intercepting their traffic. So this is almost certainly malicious. More often than not, the hacker will even enable internet access on the evil twin. So, people will stay there longer because if, obviously if they have no internet access, they're going to say, what's going on here? And they'll signal someone at, an IT to fix it. But if they have internet access, then they're likely going to stay there and, do their business. And even if they get some certificate errors due to a man-in-the-middle attack, most users are probably just going to click through that until they get, tired of, clicking through all these certificate warnings. And then they will eventually signal IT to say, something's not right. But in the meantime, we may have lost sensitive data. Maybe the user lost credit card information or passwords, things like that. So there's certainly serious risk involved here, and something we want to, the prevention of which we want to automate if at all possible. Okay, so now that we've looked at the 6 major Wi-Fi threats, let's move on to the Watchguard Cloud Wi-Fi dashboard portal. So if you've never worked in Watchguard Cloud before, then you may not even know how to get there. So if you log into your Watchguard partner account, you'll end up on the partner portal, then you can click on through to the support center, and there you'll see under the menu item, My Watchguard, a link to Wi-Fi Cloud. If you click on that, you will end up here in this sort of pre-dashboard. The Manage tile on the right will take you to the legacy interface, which has since been replaced by the Discover tile on the left. Now, if you have already been working with Cloud Wi-Fi in the past from Watchguard, then you may have already configured some things there. There are some settings there that are no longer available in the Discover tile, so it could be that you still need to access that for just changing some things in the future. But if you're just getting started with Wi-Fi Cloud from Watchguard, then you will actually spend all of your time in the Discover tile. The other tiles in the middle are useful for other aspects of Watchguard Total Wi-Fi, like analytics and creating captive portals, which are very cool. But since we're focusing on the security side of the story today, we'll be spending all of our time on the Discover dashboard. Now, just a small reminder before we dive into that dashboard, Watchguard Wi-Fi comes in 3 different versions. Basic Wi-Fi is used with a gateway wireless controller and cannot be managed from the cloud. Only APs with secure Wi-Fi or total Wi-Fi can be managed from the cloud, so keep that in mind when considering your order and speaking to your customers about their Wi-Fi needs. So, this is what the Discover dashboard looks like. You'll see some very interesting information as we navigate to where we need to be for security, but I'm going to limit the scope of today's session to the security configuration and monitoring. So let's start by looking at our configuration options. So over here on the configure menu item on the left, you'll see that I can configure Wi-Fi, I can configure alerts, and there are several WIPS configuration options that we'll look at here in just a moment. But let's look here at Wi-Fi first, not to configure it, but to show you what the starting situation is really for our Wi-Fi setup today. As you'll see here at the top, the location tree, the navigator as it's called, is set to Area 51. And so that's where my location is. So if we open that, as you'll see, the access points will whenever you first configure them, they'll end up here in the staging area, and then you can move them to whatever folder or floor that they belong in. So here I've got a floor is basement. Not everything can be configured at a floor level. Sometimes some things have to be configured at the folder level. So that's where I am at the moment, and I can just close that again, and I always have it up here as a reminder where I am exactly. So if I've got multiple locations or multiple floors, for example, it's easy for me to visualize where I am. So I've got 2 SSIDs configured here. One is a guest SSID, the other is private, which is my internal SSID, both on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and yeah, just pretty classic setup for my SSIDs. Of course, I can configure DHCP and all that good stuff in there, VLANs and all that good stuff. The radio settings, which channels am I going to be using? These are all pretty standard things for any Wi-Fi setup. Same thing for 5 gigahertz, just more channels. If I know a lot about that stuff, then I can fiddle with it if I want. Then I've got the device settings, and this is really important because the first thing we see here up here at the top is turn access points into dedicated WIPS sensors. So Watchguard really allows you to integrate their security solution into existing Wi-Fi installations. So for example, you have a whole Wi-Fi installation from another vendor and you say, okay, yeah, but I'm not really satisfied with their security solution, or they don't even have a security solution, and you want to install Watchguard stuff, but you don't want to have it doing Wi-Fi because you've already got Wi-Fi. You can turn them into dedicated WIPS sensors. And you may say, oh, well, you know, it's expensive just for a sensor. Well, really, it's going to the sensor performance will be much better when it's just a dedicated WIPS sensor. Because as you can see here below that, we've got background scanning as an option, and that is for access points. Say, for example, we have Watchguard access points that are doing Wi-Fi. They only have 2 radios, so they will be doing background scanning in between handling client traffic. You do have the AP420, which has 3 radios, so it's got one for 2.4, one for 5, and then a dedicated radio for scanning. So it's automatically going to be doing scanning full-time on that 3rd radio. We want to enable Wi-Fi security features here as well. That's, of course, we're talking about security, so that is something we want to enable. And below that, we have just a number of other configuration things that are not really security related. So we look over here at security, and we can see we have some monitoring options, which are important. If you're wondering why this is purple on my screen and how I'm able to get these tooltip things, it's because I have help enabled over here. And so it gives me all this extra information. If I'm not sure what this function or what this feature does, it's always really easy. I don't have to go to an external help page. It's really just here within the dashboard, which is pretty handy. If you're not familiar with these things, if you're working with it for the first time, that is certainly an extra or an added value. Here down below, we can see which channels we're going to monitor, which channels we're going to defend, all good things to be aware of. And so that was pretty much it for configuring the Wi-Fi. Now, configuring WIPS is a whole different ballgame. As you can see here, the first 2 things we're going to look at are auto classifications of access points and clients. Below that, we've got the automatic intrusion prevention, so what things are we going to automatically prevent? And then, of course, our authorized Wi-Fi policy at the bottom is the last thing we'll look at. So before we go any further with that, I just want to show here at the top, at this page from Watchguard, that they really show you actually how to configure their automatic intrusion prevention to stop the 6 known Wi-Fi categories threat categories that we already talked about earlier. So it's really clear which things you need to enable. You're not limited to those things, of course, and you're not forced to enable those things either, because you need to, of course, think about your each context as you come across it. But they certainly give you a guide for knowing which things you need to enable for blocking these 6 known Wi-Fi threat categories. So let's look here at WIPS access point auto classification. So this is quite simple, and both of these are recommended settings by Watchguard. So what do we have here? We have external access points. Okay, if it's potentially external and it's in the uncategorized list, then we definitely want to go ahead and classify it as external. Then we have rogue access points, same there. If it's potentially rogue, then we want to list it as rogue. Now, there are several categories that access points and clients can belong to, and we'll look at here in just a moment. But they can be external, they can be guest, they can be authorized, or they can be rogue, or they can be uncategorized. So uncategorized is really, sort of this limbo situation where it's not clear yet to Watchguard WIPS. Is it guest? Is it authorized? Is it external? Things like that. Now, the ones that, if it's connecting to our own Wi-Fi, be it guest or authorized, it's pretty quick to pick that up. But if it's connected to an external access point or a rogue access point, that's not always clear. It takes a little bit longer for the categories, for the classification to take place. So we look down here, we can see now client auto classification, and that's a lot more involved. There's a lot more to look at there. First, the initial client classification. Do we want new clients discovered at this location to be automatically authorized? Not necessarily, because they could still be they could perhaps be better classified in other categories. So I don't do that automatically. If we look down here, we'll see Clients connecting to authorized access points. What do I want uncategorized clients connecting to authorized access points to be classified as authorized? Well, first of all, what does authorized mean? Authorized actually means sort of our non-guest SSIDs. So they're ours, they're authorized, but they're also non-guest, because they do make a distinction here between guest SSIDs and authorized access points. So if they're uncategorized at that point and they connect, then yeah, that's probably legitimate. But if they're external and they're suddenly connecting to an authorized access point, that's a little bit odd. Same goes for guests. You know, I don't want to reclassify them as authorized. Say, for example, I've got an employee who skips over to the guest SSID to circumvent customer or to the company security, and then decides to come back later to the trusted internet. I don't want to reclassify him as authorized, because I want to actually talk to that person and say, hey, that's not okay what you're doing, that you're breaching company policy. So there are a number of different settings here to be looked at. If someone's connected to a misconfigured authorized access point, for example, so as I talked about earlier, we've deployed a new SSID or a new access point, and we forgot to set up a PSK, for example, so it's an open SSID. Well, anybody in the meantime could connect to that. So if they're all authorized all of a sudden, then that's not what I want, really. So I don't want to classify someone who has connected to a misconfigured access point as authorized. As you can see here, we can, clients connecting to rogue access points. What about clients connecting to guest SSIDs? What about clients connecting to external access points? So you can see here what the options that I've selected here for the time being. But again, you can always go through this guide that Watchguard has made available to you for a little guidance in how you should configure your setup. Again, you're always going to need to think about the setup for your customer and in their context. So the next thing we see here is automatic intrusion prevention. And this is, as I said, this is actually where you're going to refer to this guide, not the client classification. But so this is all about the prevention. So of course we want to block rogue access points, misconfigured access points. Some things are blocked by default, and again you'll see that here. As you can see, by default, rogue clients are not permitted to connect to authorized APs. That only makes sense. So that's not something I can really turn off. But I can prevent a lot of other things, like authorized client misassociation. For example, I don't want authorized clients to be, I can actually block them from connecting to guest SSIDs, or I can disrupt that traffic so that they give up on it. I don't want them connecting to external SSIDs, like neighboring SSIDs, for example. Guest clients, I've decided not to turn this on. That's just a personal choice here. For example, say I've got someone external walks through our office for a visit or whatever, and then he sees our PSK, he takes note of that, he's connected to our guest Wi-Fi, but I don't want him to, when he goes back to his company and connects to his own Wi-Fi, I don't want to be messing with that traffic, because it's actually against the law to be messing with, to be interfering with an external company's Wi-Fi communication. So you can get into big trouble with that. So you need to be aware of that. And then, so as you can see here, a number of other things, ad hoc connections, for example, something to take into account there would be if you have screens in your meeting rooms and they have a screen sharing capability, that could be considered an ad hoc connection. So you may need to include that in the next configuration, which we'll talk about just in a moment, the authorized Wi-Fi profile, to avoid that being viewed as an ad hoc connection and being blocked. So let's look here at the last option we've got is the authorized Wi-Fi policy. This is where we will include all of the Wi-Fi that is authorized to be broadcast on our network. So this is the way for the WIPs to know what's authorized. So it will be able to say if something's not, if something's misconfigured. So as you can see here, I've got two SSIDs. One is a guest SSID, one is not. If a client connects to the guest SSID, it will be classified as a guest client. If I don't have that configured correctly, then it's not going to know how to classify things correctly. If I've got an access point that is broadcasting an SSID that doesn't match these settings, then it will be labeled as a misconfigured access point. and that could mess up other things as well. So just have an idea of what that looks like, which frequency bands are allowed on that for that SSID, which security settings, which encryption protocol, which authentication framework, a number of different things. So those are options that we have. But basically, the main thing to take into account is you need to have any SSIDs that you're broadcasting need to be included here in your authorized Wi-Fi policy. They need to be labeled correctly as a guest SSID or a non-guest SSID, basically. So that is it for the configuration, really. If we look back at the dashboard, one other important thing to look at here is the WIPS dashboard. The automatic intrusion prevention by default is turned off. Now, why is that? Well, as I said, you need to make sure you're not interfering with external traffic from neighboring companies, for example. So we need to make sure that so we run everything in a sort of an audit mode for a while to make sure that our SSIDs are labeled the correct way, so that external SSIDs are labeled the correct way, that we don't, for example, label an external SSID as authorized by accident, and then we turn on our automatic intrusion prevention, and then things are all out of whack, and we start blocking traffic from our neighboring company. That's something we want to avoid, obviously. So we're going to make sure that we do this for a couple of weeks and make sure that everything is set up the way it's supposed to be set up, and then we can turn that on. And if things get out of whack, if we've made a mistake in some respect, we can always just turn it back off, and we can troubleshoot and see what's happened. Actually, when you make changes to the Wi-Fi in any way, like if you're adding SSIDs or you're changing SSIDs, then I would recommend that you turn off the automatic intrusion prevention so you can change your authorized Wi-Fi profile, you can change your SSIDs and make sure that everything is synced up correctly, and then you can turn the automatic intrusion prevention back on. So that was it, I guess, for the configuration and for enabling automatic intrusion prevention. The next thing we'll do is we will actually look at we will monitor the WIPS, and we can see during our audit mode whether everything is set up the way we want it to be set up. So I can see here that I've got one managed Wi-Fi device. I've labeled it Alien Lab Wi-Fi. This is my AP125 from Watchguard. I've got a number of specs here that I can look at. I can see it's operating in AP mode, so it's not in sensor mode. I can see its uptime, its power source. If I want, I can see which SSIDs it's broadcasting. Let's see here. So those are the BSSIDs that it's broadcasting. And then, it looks like I accidentally went back. I can see which access points are visible, which access points that it can see. So as you see, there are a lot of different external access points here in the neighborhood. There's my one authorized access point. You can see that it's indicated as such. I don't have any uncategorized or rogue. Well, that's good. So that's a good thing, good place to start. And my one access point that's authorized is indicated as such. And yeah, so that looks good to go. And clients, I can see, are there any clients that I'm seeing anywhere? So I can see I've got my analyst laptop. It's connected to the Lab Trust, so it is an authorized client. I've got Bill Brasky smartphone. It's connected to guests, so it is labeled as a guest client. Perfect. I've got a couple here that are external. So it's clear that they've been connecting to external access points, and I've got a number that are uncategorized. So these are things that may be connected to external access points or connected to something, but it's not authorized and it's not guest. So until we know for sure what it is, it's going to be left as uncategorized, which is fine. So, and then we can also see our networks here. We can see that these are the networks that I have set up that are being monitored. So this is my management VLAN, this is my trusted VLAN, and this is my guest VLAN. So everything is the way that it's supposed to be for me. Everything looks good. Everything is green that's supposed to be green. Everything is blue that's supposed to be blue. I don't have any rogue access points at the moment. Nothing is being blocked or automatically prevented. So this looks to me like a safe time to go back and enable automatic intrusion prevention. Now I can do that here, or I could go to this part and I could say activate. I think something that maybe I forgot to mention was here the current intrusion prevention level. I'm not sure if I talked about that. So there are 4 different levels. Block is the most intense and degrade is the least intense. So, but block, well, there's a little bit of a trade-off here in terms of what can be blocked and what can be, or disrupted, and what can be monitored. So the more we're monitoring, the less efficient we'll be at blocking, and the better we are at blocking, the less efficient we'll be at monitoring. So block will only enable us to be active on one channel on 2.4 and one channel on 5 to block traffic, but really block it well. And as we go up to degrade, we can be on 4 channels in 2.4 and 4 channels on 5 gigahertz, but it will be less effective of a block. Now, Watchguard recommends using disrupt, which is 2 channels on each band, and so I'm going to leave that there for the time being. We can always go back and adjust that if we notice that it's not working the way that we had anticipated. So just so you're aware of that. And now here I can go up to automatic intrusion prevention and turn it on. As you'll see, it says, please ensure that you're done making all network configuration and deployment changes. Make sure that your authorized access points are correctly categorized as authorized. And it says, please check this every time you add new access points to the network. And you can apply it recursively to subfolders. If, for example, I was at the top of my navigation tree, then I could, apply that everywhere. But I'm specifically going to apply it to the Area 51 folder where I've got the basement floor, and I'm going to go ahead and activate that. So as you can see, it's active at the moment. If I go back here to dashboard, and I don't think I really need to save that. So let's go back here and dashboard, leave. Yeah, so I didn't really need to save it because it actually actually went ahead and applied it. So that's active now. A couple of other things we can look at real quick here before we start looking at simulated attacks or simulated threats. My access point is active, so that's good. I have 2 clients currently online. We had already seen that. And here I'll see if there are any access points that are misconfigured or rogue, or any clients that are rogue or misbehaving. A misbehaving client is a client that connects to a misconfigured access point. And then if there are any alerts, if there are Wi-Fi alerts, if there are system alerts, if there are WIPS alerts. So of course we'll be focusing mainly on WIPS alerts. Now, before we start with looking at the different Wi-Fi threat categories that we discussed earlier, I'd like to take a minute just to see if our automatic intrusion prevention is working, that it's functional the way that it's supposed to be. So one thing that we configured earlier that we would want to prevent is to keep our authorized clients from connecting to a guest SSID, for example, or to an external SSID. So as you can see here, I already have some errors up here. So if I look at the WIPS alerts, we see a number of different things here. One is that the smartphone tried to connect to a guest SSID and needs to be prevented, and it actually was prevented. So if we look here, we can see that it was quarantined by the sensor, and then at a certain point it was removed from quarantine when the connection failed. So on my smartphone, I was trying to connect to the guest SSID, lab guest, and it continued to connect and connect and connect without ever making the successful connection. So that is positive. If we look at the other alerts, we can see that I also tried to connect to an unauthorized access point, which is actually just another, which is an external SSID here, both with the laptop and with the smartphone, and both of them generated an alert. However, if we look here, you can see that there was no quarantining taken place. So why was there no quarantining, you may ask yourself? Well, that has to do with the fact that I'm using an AP125, which does background scanning. And the background scanning, actually I can show you here, we see here access point with background scanning can detect over-the-wire threats such as rogue APs and banned devices, but has limited ability to detect over-the-air threats. Cannot perform active prevention of over-the-air threats. So that is an important distinction to be made when you choose which access points you'll be using, and if you're going to deploy them as sensors or dedicated sensors, or if you're going to choose the AP420 which has a dedicated radio, of course. So in this case, it noticed that that was problematic, but it was not able to perform a quarantining action. If we look over here at the devices, we'll see that we have 2 misbehaving devices, and of course both of these here, because they have been connected to an external access point at this point. So just an important thing to remember there when you are doing your planning and suggesting which access points that would be best for your customer. So let's take a look at the different Wi-Fi threat categories and trigger some of these things and see what happens. So we have an idea of what kinds of things we can expect. How do we work through these things? How are they indicated in the dashboard? The first one we're going to look at is the Ad-Hoc Network, and I've already set up a mobile hotspot on one of the devices that was connected to the trusted SSID. And as you can see, there's already some information up here at the top. There's a device that is a client that's misbehaving, and there is one WIPS alert. And if I go over here to WIPS, we'll see that the security status is currently vulnerable for this network, and we have one live security alert. So if we look, we will see that we have a misbehaving client, and it is this one here. Of course, we don't know why it's misbehaving at this moment. We just know that it's been labeled a misbehaving client. But of course, if we go over here and check on the WIPS alert, we'll get more information, and we will see that we have a mobile hotspot running on an authorized client. So it shouldn't be doing that, and that there is there's the MAC address that is provided for it as well. We get here a recommended action, what we can do about it. Of course, we want that person to stop using a mobile hotspot on the authorized network. And as a result, basically what I wanted to say is that if we go over here to WIPS and clients, it's still going to be labeled as a misbehaving client, and that will resolve itself once the person stops using the mobile hotspot. So they should have some connection issues, drop packets, things like that. So their connection should be degraded or disrupted in this case, and they should have some issues that should discourage them from using this. And at the same time, we'll also receive an email notification if we've set that up, so we could follow up with that person to let them know that they breached company policy by doing that. And then this misbehaving notifier will resolve itself, and it will simply look like a regular authorized client. But again, that takes some time for it to resolve itself before everything is picked up and synced. So that is the Ad-Hoc Network. Now we'll see the next one. I believe is the neighboring AP that we will look at. So let's look at what happens when we end up with a misconfigured access point. So there are really 2 things we're going to look at here. One is what happens to the access point, and 2, what happens to clients that try to connect to a misconfigured access point. So first of all, let's just see what our starting situation is here. We've added temp SSID as an extra SSID that's being broadcast by the access point at the moment. But as you'll notice down here in the authorized Wi-Fi policy, it's not included in the policy as an authorized SSID. Now, something that maybe I didn't mention before here is this option, use SSID profiles to verify managed access point configuration. If you click on this, it's actually going to look at whatever SSIDs are being broadcast by the access point and view them as authorized. So that's not what we want really today. So we're going to view that as something that was set up incorrectly, and so we're going to make use of the authorized Wi-Fi policy, which is, by the way, whatever you would use for any third-party Wi-Fi SSIDs. So if we look over at WIPS at the moment, we'll see that the access point now is labeled as misconfigured. And if we look over here and we click on the multiple, we'll see here that it's the temp SSID that is the one that's misconfigured. So there we can see that there's already some issue, and it's indicated in that way. If we look up here, we'll see we've got one misconfigured access point. And if we look over here at the WIPS things, the WIPS alerts, we'll see here misconfigured authorized access point is active. The AP needs to be prevented. If we look at that, actually, we look at that alert, we'll see needs to be quarantined and has been quarantined by sensor alien lab Wi-Fi. So this may be a little bit confusing because you will actually see that the access point is still broadcasting its SSIDs, and it's actually still broadcasting the SSID that's not authorized. But when you try to connect with one of your devices, you will see that it's not, you can't connect to it. So if you have an authorized device, like here we've got here, if we look here at our clients, we'll see neither of these devices are able to connect to that SSID. So what happens is when they try to connect, it just keeps trying to connect and connect and connect, but it never is able to connect. And so it will eventually fail over to a different SSID if there's one available that it automatically would connect to, and otherwise it just won't connect at all. Now, the thing that could be a bit confusing is that you don't really see any notification that those devices are trying to connect actually to the SSID that's not authorized. So that could be confusing, I guess, if you were looking for it somewhere, but at the same time, it's handy just because it blocks it and doesn't allow it to transpire. So it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. The SSID is being actively blocked, but again, it's still being broadcast, which could be confusing as well. So, but when you actually try to connect to it, you'll see that it's not possible. Returning just a moment to the neighboring access points Wi-Fi threat category. We actually talked about that earlier when we looked at what would happen if an authorized client were to connect to a guest SSID or to an external SSID. So we already covered that threat category actually. So now let's move on to the next category, which is rogue access point, and at the same time rogue client. So I introduced an access point into the Meraki access point to the network, and it is sending out an SSID called My Personal AP. So the first thing we notice here really is that we see this showing up here as a rogue access point, that there is containment in progress. We can see that here actually also if we look at the WIPS things here. Let's see here, rogue access point is active, needs to be prevented. So we can look at that and see it has been quarantined by the sensor, so that's good. So what does that mean actually? I mean, what happens if you try to connect to those to that rogue access point then? Well, actually, that's where we see something where we'll have, if it's an authorized client, as we've configured down here, I believe that's client auto classification, connecting to rogue. So reclassify clients other than authorized clients that connect to rogue access point as rogue. So what happens if an authorized client connects to a rogue access point? Then it's actually labeled as misbehaving, and it will be blocked really. So I had a ping running constantly, and I think maybe 1 in 20 pings went through, and at a certain point actually nothing. So I got the indication that it was connected, but I didn't have any internet access. And occasionally it would switch over and say that I had internet access, I think maybe because of a successful ping or two, and then it just went right back saying that I had no internet access again. So that's what it looks like really. So we would be seeing there a misbehaving client, and as soon as it went away from that rogue access point, then that alert would be resolved, or at least here it would be resolved. There would still be an alert here in terms of auditing. So we can see that here. I think actually if we look down here a little bit further, that was this one here. We can see here, yeah. So we can see that it was quarantined by the sensor because it was trying to connect to, well, here it says an external AP, but it was actually a rogue AP. Now, what happens if so you may wonder, how do we end up seeing here a rogue client actually? So if we look over here at our configure WIPS, I'm sorry, that's monitor WIPS, but configure WIPS in client auto classification, we can see clients connecting to rogue access points. So it's not authorized clients, but what else do we have? So that would be an unauthorized client. So basically something that's anything that's uncategorized, or an external client, for example. And so that's what I did. I took my PC here and connected it to the rogue access point, and that's where we end up with this here. And so basically it says that I am connected to that SSID, and that I don't have internet. So I keep getting a failed ping. It will flap occasionally, but I would say 99 out of 100 pings are failing at the moment. So it is blocking that effectively. Now keep in mind that if you have this rogue access point is on both channels, or on both frequency bands, that you may not be blocking both of them. You may only be blocking the 2.4, or only blocking the 5, if you're only doing background scanning, and if you're not able to have a dedicated sensor working for everything, or a dedicated radio on an access point. So again, something to keep in mind when you're determining whether or not you're going to take, for example, an AP125 that only has 2 radios, or for example an AP325 or an AP420 that has a dedicated third WIPS radio. One thing to add here to this, maybe I was unclear, is that once we've categorized something, or something has automatically been classified as rogue, we want to prevent it from connecting to anything that's legitimate. So actually, with the computer here that was connected to the rogue access point, and hence was classified as a rogue client, then afterwards I tried to connect to a lab guest, and you can see here that it actually is connected to lab guest, but it's not actually able to pass any traffic. Pings are failing the entire time, and it is saying that I'm connected, but that I have no internet access. So it was successful also in preventing that cross-contamination, let's call it, from something that was external and it was considered rogue, and then is trying to come back to or come to one of our trusted networks. Let's take a look now at the last Wi-Fi threat category. That was the dreaded evil twin access point, also known as a honeypot access point. Now, in the meantime, I have set up an AP420 in the network, which has a dedicated third radio for WIPS sensor scanning. The reason I did that is because I want to make clear that while some of these things with the AP125, the AP25 is able to block some over-the-wire threats, to prevent some over-the-wire threats, but the over-the-air threats really require that dedicated scanning radio. And I just wanted to show you as proof that it really is, that it does work as intended. So I decided to put in the AP420 to demonstrate that. Now this is pre-recorded, so in the meantime the evil twin access point has been brought offline, so obviously it's not affecting our security status, but while it was active it did. So let's look over here at the WIPS alerts, and I'll show you the alerts that were applicable. So in order to create the evil twin access point, I used a Wi-Fi pineapple to spoof the SSID. And we can see that here, that it is advertising SSID Lab Trust. And you'll see that there was a guest client, a smartphone, connected to an external access point. That's an important distinction to be made, the external access point, because it technically is an external access point because it's not on our network. So it's not a rogue access point, it's on another network. It was beyond our network. And technically it is an external access point, whether it's spoofing our SSID or not, it's still an external access point. So if we look over here to see what our options were, because you can notice here that the guest client was connected. It doesn't say anything about was quarantined. So if we look up here at configure WIPS automatic intrusion prevention, we will see that guest client misassociation is not prevented to an external access point. And the reason that is, in this scenario, is that, say for example, we have a retail situation where we've got many shops one next to the other and they're all providing their own Wi-Fi. And if I go into one store and I connect to his Wi-Fi and I'm labeled a guest client and I am shopping there, and then I go to the next store and I want to use their Wi-Fi, that Wi-Fi of the neighboring shop is for me an external access point or an external SSID. So I don't want to prevent a roaming customer from connecting to their rightful Wi-Fi of the neighboring shop. So that's something you need to take into account. Of course, in a different scenario, in a different context, you may be justified in not allowing guest clients to connect to external access points in the area. But in this case, I thought it was probably not a good idea to do that. So it was not prevented automatically. We did have, however, the notification in here with our notification of the evil twin access point that a guest client had connected. So we still have we could still do some follow-up there if need be. So that's one option. What I did though is I went ahead and changed manually the classification of the smartphone to an authorized client, meaning it was allowed to connect to the Lab Trust SSID, which is our authorized SSID. And then I attempted to connect to the spoofed SSID as well. I was unable to do so. And you may say, well, yeah, you can say that it was unable to do so, but where's the proof? So you can see here the smartphone needs to be prevented. If we look here, we can see authorized client connection to external or potentially external AP needs to be quarantined and has been quarantined. So heavy duty Wi-Fi is the name that I gave to the AP420, and it was able to quarantine the smartphone. So it was not able to connect to the Wi-Fi. It simply would not connect. It's not that it would connect and then not pass traffic or anything. It simply would not connect seemingly. As a user, my experience was that it would not connect to the SSID. So successful in blocking that threat. So my authorized users were clearly protected by this mechanism that would prevent them from connecting to external SSIDs. And in this case, of course, that external SSID was an evil twin access point. So that, of course, we have a little bit more added visibility, because if it hadn't been an external access point, then of course it would have been blocked as well, and I would have noticed, okay, connecting to an external access point. But I would prefer to know that that external access point was actually an evil twin, if that were the case, so that I could follow up or try to locate that evil twin access point so I can have it removed. So that was it for the evil twin access point. Maybe not as flashy or spectacular as you would hope to see, but really it's that simple with a correct configuration that we can apply at a top level or at a certain location. We can easily deploy our WIPS configuration and then be quite sure that that our clients will be protected and will be also held accountable for following company policy as has been described to them.